The sun was setting over the small town of Omuoba, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Vincent, a strikingly handsome man in his late 20s, leaned casually against his sleek, black sedan. His crisp white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and a designer watch glinting in the fading light made him the epitome of charm. To the women who passed by, he was irresistible, a vision of success, confidence, and allure. But beneath his polished exterior lay a man with a heart as cold as the Omuoba River in winter. Vincent had carved a reputation for himself, not as the town's eligible bachelor, but as its most cunning predator. With an unerring ability to read women, he knew exactly what to say and how to say it. He had an arsenal of compliments, promises, and sweet nothings that could melt the hardest hearts. Yet, once he had secured their trust and emptied their wallets, his demeanor turned icy, devoid of the warmth he once exuded. Women whispered his name with a mixture of longing and dread, for to fall for Vincent was to dance with heartbreak. It was a bright Monday morning when Vincent spotted his next target, Esther, a nurse who had just returned from a work trip in Lagos. She was petite, with ebony skin that glowed like polished mahogany. Her laughter, carried on the breeze, was infectious, and Vincent immediately began to craft his approach. He knew Esther was hard-working, dedicated, and careful with her money, a challenge he relished. Vincent's first move was calculated. He pretended to be a concerned passerby when he noticed Esther struggling to carry groceries into her modest home. "Let me help you with that," he offered, flashing his trademark smile. Esther hesitated at first, but his warm demeanor disarmed her. Within minutes, he had carried her bags inside, cracked a few jokes, and earned a heartfelt thank you. By the end of their brief encounter, Vincent had secured her phone number with the promise of helping her fix her squeaky gate. Over the next few weeks, Vincent played his part perfectly. He sent good morning texts, brought Esther flowers after her long shifts, and even sat with her elderly mother during an unexpected illness. Esther was smitten. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream of love and stability. What she didn't know was that Vincent had discovered her savings account balance during one of their evenings together when he borrowed her phone under the guise of checking the weather. Soon, Vincent began planting seeds of deception. "Esther, my car broke down on the way to an important business deal," he lamented one evening. "If I don't fix it by tomorrow, I'll lose the contract." Concerned, Esther didn't hesitate to offer him money. She didn't realize it was the beginning of the end. By the time Vincent was done with her, he had drained her savings and disappeared without so much as a goodbye. When Esther tried calling him, the number was no longer in service. Vincent's path crossed with Precious during a high-profile wedding in Abuja. The venue was grand, the kind of place where only the wealthy or well-connected gathered. Precious, tall and radiant in a flowing green gown, caught his eye immediately. Her confidence was magnetic, her laughter like music that drew the attention of everyone around her. For the first time in a while, Vincent felt like he had met someone who could match his wit and charm. As they exchanged pleasantries, Vincent was surprised by how quickly Precious warmed to him. She shared stories of her successful business ventures and travels abroad, painting herself as a woman of means and sophistication. Vincent, thinking he had struck gold, ignored the faint hint of bad breath that lingered as they spoke. "I can fix that," he thought smugly, already envisioning the fortune he would extract from her. Vincent wasted no time courting Precious. He had learned that she had a fondness for expensive things, so he carefully crafted an image of himself as a wealthy businessman with investments in real estate and oil. On their first date, he borrowed his friend's luxury car and took her to one of Abuja's fanciest restaurants. Precious, impressed by the apparent extravagance, leaned into the performance, subtly probing for details about his finances while regaling him with tales of her supposed entrepreneurial success. "You're quite the achiever, Vincent," Precious purred, her eyes sparkling under the dim restaurant lights. "I admire a man who knows how to handle his business." Vincent chuckled, already envisioning the riches he thought Precious possessed. Meanwhile, Precious, though captivated by his charm, was strategizing. If this man had real wealth, he was her golden ticket out of her precarious financial situation. Both left the date convinced they had the upper hand. Their courtship unfolded in a whirlwind of lies. Vincent lavished Precious with borrowed gifts, jewelry, perfumes, and even a designer handbag he had taken on credit. Precious responded by fabricating stories of her booming import-export business, convincing Vincent that she was sitting on a small fortune. Their relationship quickly became the talk of their circles, with friends envying what appeared to be a perfect match. Yet beneath the surface, cracks began to form. Precious's breath, which Vincent had dismissed as a minor flaw, became harder to ignore during long evenings together. At the same time, Vincent started noticing inconsistencies in Precious's stories. But their shared greed and deceit blinded them to each other's faults. When Precious began hinting at marriage, Vincent, seeing an opportunity for greater financial gain, decided to propose. The wedding was a spectacle. Vincent, unwilling to spend his own money, conned several friends into contributing to the lavish ceremony, promising lucrative returns from a business deal. Precious, desperate to appear affluent, borrowed heavily to buy the perfect gown and host the reception at an elite venue. The day was filled with laughter, music, and applause, but those closest to the couple noticed something unsettling: a lack of genuine affection. Vincent and Precious smiled for the cameras but avoided each other's eyes, each silently plotting their next move. As the guests departed, the newlyweds sat in their hotel suite, exhausted but triumphant. "We did it," Precious said, holding up a champagne glass. "To the beginning of a powerful partnership." Vincent clinked his glass against hers, masking his unease. For the first time, he wondered if he had met his match in deceit. Marriage didn't change Vincent and Precious's nature, it amplified it. They moved into a luxurious apartment they couldn't afford and began hosting extravagant parties to maintain appearances. Precious, now fully aware of Vincent's lack of wealth, focused her energy on convincing her friends to invest in fake business ventures. Vincent, meanwhile, targeted married women in their circle, exploiting their trust to fund his extravagant lifestyle. Their schemes worked for a while, but the couple's greed knew no bounds. They began sabotaging relationships, spreading false rumors to create discord among their wealthier friends. They believed that a divided circle was easier to manipulate. But cracks in their faade began to show. Bills piled up, friends grew suspicious, and the couple's arguments became frequent and explosive. The pressure of their extravagant lifestyle began to weigh heavily on Vincent and Precious. They had managed to swindle a few naïve acquaintances, but the money wasn't enough to sustain their growing expenses. Creditors started showing up unannounced, and their once vibrant parties turned into hushed gatherings with fewer guests. Rumors about their financial instability began circulating in the very social circles they had worked so hard to infiltrate. Precious grew increasingly desperate. One evening, she confronted Vincent. "You promised me a life of luxury, Vincent. Instead, I'm dodging calls from lenders every day." Her voice was sharp, and her piercing gaze could have cut glass. Vincent, unshaken, smirked and replied, "And you promised me wealth, Precious. I guess we're both great at telling stories." The tension between them reached a boiling point, but neither was willing to abandon their partnership of convenience. Their latest con involved a wealthy but gullible couple, Mr. and Mrs. Adebayo, who had been impressed by Vincent and Precious's supposed business acumen. The Adebayos were looking for partners to invest in a real estate venture, and Vincent seized the opportunity to present himself as an experienced developer. Precious played her part, charming Mrs. Adebayo with exaggerated stories of her husband's success and their mutual investments overseas. The couple managed to extract a significant sum of money from the Adebayos, promising a hefty return within 6 months. But when the promised deadline came and went without any sign of profits, the Adebayos began asking questions. Vincent and Precious scrambled to fabricate excuses, but their lies quickly unraveled. Mr. Adebayo, furious, threatened legal action, and word of the failed venture spread like wildfire. As their reputation crumbled, friends and former allies turned against Vincent and Precious. The once envied couple became the butt of cruel jokes, their names whispered in derision at gatherings. Invitations stopped coming, and their phones buzzed less frequently. Even those who had admired their ostentatious lifestyle now saw them for what they were: frauds living on borrowed time. In a final attempt to salvage their image, Vincent and Precious hosted a dinner party to address the rumors. But the event backfired spectacularly. Guests openly confronted them about unpaid debts and failed promises. Vincent's confident facade cracked as he stammered through half-baked explanations. Precious, usually quick on her feet, was visibly shaken. By the end of the evening, the couple had been thoroughly humiliated, their once glamorous lives reduced to a cautionary tale. With their reputation in tatters and their schemes exposed, Vincent and Precious turned on each other. The fights became daily occurrences, filled with accusations and venomous insults. Precious berated Vincent for his laziness and lack of foresight, while Vincent mocked her vanity and the bad breath he could no longer ignore. The couple that had once conspired together now seemed bent on destroying one another. The breaking point came when Precious discovered that Vincent had secretly been meeting another woman, trying to reignite his old patterns of deceit. Furious, she kicked him out of their apartment and filed for divorce. Vincent, seeing no more financial advantage in staying, left without protest, eager to escape the wreckage of their toxic union. Their separation marked the end of their reign of deceit. Precious moved back to her hometown, a shadow of the confident woman she had once pretended to be. Vincent, stripped of his charm and credibility, drifted aimlessly from one town to another, unable to rebuild his former schemes. Both had learned, too late, that a life built on lies and greed was bound to collapse. As the years passed, their story became a cautionary tale for the people of Omuoba and beyond. Parents told their children about Vincent and Precious, not as villains, but as warnings of what happens when ambition and deceit consume the soul. After the divorce, Vincent's life unraveled further. With no stable home or connections, he resorted to staying with distant relatives and sleeping in rundown motels. His once sharp suits were now frayed, and the sparkle in his eyes had dulled. His charm, which had once been his greatest weapon, began to fail him. Word of his exploits had spread far and wide, leaving him without the trust he needed to manipulate others. Desperate to regain his former status, Vincent tried his hand at new schemes, but none succeeded. His confidence wavered with each failed attempt, and he began to realize that his reputation had become his greatest enemy. One evening, sitting alone in a dimly lit bar, Vincent stared into his drink and muttered, "What have I become?" The bartender, overhearing him, replied, "A cautionary tale, my friend." Meanwhile, Precious returned to her hometown of Ekwulu, a village nestled between rolling hills. Stripped of the luxury she had once flaunted, she moved in with her widowed mother, who welcomed her with cautious sympathy. Precious tried to rekindle the entrepreneurial dreams she had once boasted about, but the truth was, she lacked the skills and discipline to succeed. She spent her days pretending to be busy with plans, but her evenings were filled with regret and loneliness. Whenever she walked through the village, whispers followed her, and the children sang mocking songs about her failed marriage. Precious knew she had no one to blame but herself, but the weight of her choices felt too heavy to bear. Fate brought Vincent and Precious together again one fateful day. It was market day in a bustling town halfway between their respective villages. Vincent, gaunt and disheveled, was trying to sell fake herbal remedies to unsuspecting shoppers. Precious, dressed in simple clothes and carrying a basket of yams, spotted him from across the square. At first, she froze, unsure whether to approach or walk away. But Vincent saw her too, and the brief moment of recognition passed between them like an electric current. Precious, unable to resist the urge, approached him. "Vincent," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and bitterness. He turned slowly, his once confident demeanor now replaced with something closer to shame. "Precious," he replied, "what a surprise." The conversation that followed was awkward and filled with veiled accusations. Precious couldn't help but remind him of his failures, while Vincent pointed out that she hadn't fared any better. Yet, beneath their barbs, there was an unspoken understanding: they were both victims of their own greed. Despite their rocky reunion, Vincent and Precious decided to sit and talk over a meal at a roadside eatery. For the first time, they dropped their facades and spoke honestly about their regrets. Vincent admitted how empty his life had become, and Precious confessed her loneliness and shame. They laughed bitterly at the irony of their situation, realizing how similar their downfalls had been. It was during this conversation that Precious suggested something surprising. "We may not have anything left, Vincent, but maybe we can rebuild." Not as lovers, but as partners in redemption. People love a good redemption story. Vincent, though skeptical, saw a glimmer of possibility in her words. You mean, we team up to fix the mess we made? He asked. Precious nodded. Why not? What do we have to lose? The unlikely pair began working together to repair their reputations. They started small, volunteering in their respective communities and offering free services. Precious used her charm to organize community cleanups and market events, while Vincent, using the skills he once wielded for deceit, helped local farmers draft business proposals and secure loans. Though their intentions were initially selfish, they hoped to rebuild their credibility for personal gain. The act of helping others began to change them. Slowly, they began to earn back the trust of those around them. Children stopped mocking Precious in the streets, and Vincent found himself welcomed into social circles he thought he'd lost forever. Though Vincent and Precious appeared to have turned over a new leaf, their motives remained as selfish as ever. Their newfound community involvement was merely a calculated move to win back trust and rebuild their reputations. Both secretly plotted ways to leverage their growing influence for personal gain, but neither revealed their plans to the other. One day, during a community meeting where they were being praised for their efforts, Vincent pulled Precious aside. I think we've proven ourselves, he whispered, his eyes glinting with the return of his old scheming energy. It's time to take things to the next level. These people trust us now, we can use that. Precious, equally cunning, smiled sweetly and nodded, though she was already crafting her own plan to leave Vincent behind once she had secured enough for herself. Their next move was to launch a fake community development fund. They convinced the villagers that they had connections with a non-governmental organization that was willing to match local investments to build schools, roads, and clinics. This is your chance to make Omuoba a model town, Precious declared during a meeting, her voice filled with false passion. Vincent added, every naira you contribute will be doubled, guaranteed. The villagers, inspired by the promise of progress, began pooling their savings. Farmers sold livestock, market women contributed their profits, and even children donated their piggy bank coins. Vincent and Precious watched with glee as the fund grew. What the villagers didn't know was that the money was being funneled into a secret account under Vincent and Precious's names. As the scheme flourished, tension between Vincent and Precious began to grow. Precious, who had always considered herself the mastermind, started suspecting that Vincent was siphoning more than his share of the funds. Meanwhile, Vincent resented how much praise Precious was receiving from the community, as though she were the sole architect of their success. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, Precious secretly met with a lawyer to transfer the funds into an account only she could access. If Vincent thinks he can outsmart me, he's mistaken, she muttered as she signed the papers. Unbeknownst to her, Vincent was already plotting his own betrayal. Using a forged signature, he planned to withdraw the money and disappear without a trace. The plan unraveled spectacularly when both Vincent and Precious attempted to execute their schemes on the same day. Precious arrived at the bank, confident that the funds were securely hers, only to discover that Vincent had already emptied the account hours earlier. Furious, she stormed out, determined to track him down. Vincent, meanwhile, had booked a ticket to a neighboring country, intending to start fresh with his ill-gotten wealth. But just as he arrived at the bus terminal, Precious intercepted him, her fury blazing. You think you can outsmart me? She hissed, grabbing his arm. The ensuing argument drew the attention of passers-by, who quickly recognized them as the celebrated community heroes. Word spread like wildfire, and within hours, a mob had gathered outside the bus terminal. The villagers, armed with the truth and their righteous anger, confronted Vincent and Precious. Where's our money? One elderly man shouted, his voice trembling with rage. A woman carrying her baby added, we trusted you. Cornered, Vincent and Precious turned on each other, hurling accusations in a desperate attempt to shift the blame. It was her idea, Vincent shouted, pointing at Precious. He took the money. Precious screamed back. Their public meltdown only confirmed their guilt, and the mob quickly handed them over to the authorities. Vincent and Precious were sentenced to a year in prison for fraud and embezzlement. Though they were placed in separate cells, they occasionally saw each other during communal work assignments. Each time their eyes met, there was no longer animosity, only the bitter recognition of shared failure. One day, Precious approached Vincent during a break. Was it worth it? She asked quietly, her tone devoid of the sharpness it once carried. Vincent sighed, staring at the ground. No, but I don't think we ever cared about the cost, did we? For the first time, there was no manipulation, no deceit, just the hollow honesty of two people who had lost everything.